99% of the new players have never heard of this card, and for a pretty good reason. What's going on, guys? This is Miasin. Today I will be taking a look at one of the most obscure cards ever printed in Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is Mystical Ref Panel. It's very old and also has one of the weirdest kind of text you can find on any card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Probably the only card in the entire game that has these words. Targets one player. What does this really mean? And is this card even playable? Well, before we get into the review of the card, make sure you like and subscribe. Let's jump right into it. So, like I said, it's a normal trap card, not once per turn. It's so old that it doesn't have to be once per turn. Activate only when a spell card that targets one player is activated. The effect of that spell card is applied to the other player instead. It kind of acts as a mirror that reflects the effect of a spell that would impact like a player and then reflects it to the opponent. It makes no sense, but how can you determine whether a card is a potential target for Mystical Ref Panel or not? Well, thanks to our TCG rulings, judges, and stuff like that, we actually have managed to kind of break it down to a certain extent. It can be used for not wide variety of applications, such as increase a player's life points, inflict direct damage to one player's life points, so it's always only applied to one player, allow one player to draw a card or cards from the top of their deck to the hand. I don't know why they really had to specify the top. It could have been from the middle. Yeah, Pot of Greed, what does the card do? Anyways, cause one player to discard from the hand. Does include cards like Tactic Talents to shuffle back the card it has to be specifically discard, or modify the actions one player can take, such as Mesmeric Control. Modify the actions one player can take. What in the flying frick is this? Like, you see, this card is so insanely obscure that even with all of your experience in Yu-Gi-Oh!, you might read this card and be like, bruh, I don't get it. How can you use this card? Well, for the most part, you're only really going to be chaining this against cards that draw cards, just so you can steal the advantage, the plus that your opponent was trying to get. You cannot chain this to cards like Regeki, Lightning Storm, Harpy's Feather Duster. Even if your opponent controlled monsters or back row, you really can't, even though it would technically target a player, in a way-ish, not really. The fact that it doesn't really belong in these categories of effects that Mystical Ref Panel covers, unfortunately makes it so the card is infinitely less good. Oh, and by the way, it also cannot be used against cards like Upstart Goblin and Card of Demise. Upstart Goblin is because it affects two players. Player A would draw one card, and player B would gain 1,000 life points, so even though these are two categories that Mystical Ref Panel would usually accept, the other condition is that it has to specifically target one player, and Card of Demise, yes, it actually also affects both players. Player A draws up to 3 cards, and player B takes no damage for the rest of the turn. Pretty stupid, right? Well, it at least can be chained against cards like Pot of Duality, and I'm pretty sure it can be chained against cards like Pot of Prosperity, which at least kinda compensates for the lack of juice that the card has, unfortunately. What the frick was Konami even thinking when they printed this card? And the fact that people play this card competitively in Monarchs just shocks me so much. But what you have to remember is that this card can be a +3 in the right context. Let me explain myself. My opponent is using Pantheism of the Monarchs, discarding a card that your opponent actually wants to keep. You chain Mystical Ref Panel. Your opponent had to give up 2 cards. You give up 1 card and you get 2 cards in exchange. So your opponent is -2 and you're +1, meaning that you are +3 in relative card advantage, which when you kind of start stacking up that card advantage becomes relevant enough for you to win. Like, if all you do is Ash or Solemn Judgment cards that draw cards, you're always trading 1 for 1 and sometimes even worse. Like Ash, you can draw multiples of it, so after your first trade, you're kind of in a bad position after that. Solemn Judgment, you're paying 4,000 life points, so it's not great. And even against cards that are kind of 1 for 1E that aren't like Trade-In and Pantheism, like Pot of Desires, yeah, sure, you're ashing a Desires, it feels good, your opponent had to banish 10 cards for literally no gain, but it's still technically a 1 for 1 trade, whereas if you went for Mystical Ref Panel instead, you would be refunding your card, so it wouldn't really be 1 for 1, you would also get 2 cards, which means that, you know, it kind of feels so much better, right? With all those positive things being said, outside of like maybe an errata, like an effect revision from Konami themselves, there is literally no way this card would ever see competitive play ever again. It's probably just destined to be trash with the current effect that it has, unless there's randomly one meta deck that always has to use like like spell cards that draw cards. Literally the only way I can see Mystical Ref Panel being good in like non-obscure environments, because as I said, this card only saw competitive play in Monarchs, and even then, people had no idea what the card did, so Judge Appeal calls were just always awkward because people were like, can I chain it to like Twin Twister, like something else? Tenacity? Can I use it against Reinforcement of the Army? Can I use it now against Sky Striker Engage because Engage says draw one card? Remember that you can't because it searches a card, and searching a card is not a part of what Mystical Ref Panel can be chained to. Hopefully I managed to kind of sum it up efficiently. I know the explanation definitely isn't on point because the card is super complicated and very messed up, but if you have any thoughts you would like to add, make sure you let me know in the comment section below. You let us all know, and yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe. I will see you guys next time.